I've made a few cutting boards before and they were pretty fun to do, but I decided to set myself a bigger challenge and try and make a cutting board using the asanoha pattern, which I've used before for kumiko, but I thought, well, it'll be interesting to try to make a cutting board with that pattern. And basically it should look kind of a bit like this, although finishing will be a bit different. According to my calculations, I now have to cut 124 triangles, which are 19 by 66 millimeters. I need to cut 122 pieces that are 51.96 millimeters long and 57 pieces that are 110.78 millimeters. Like I say, all the dimensions have to be exactly right for this pattern to work out. So I've finished milling the wood for this cutting board. It looks like quite a lot, but actually this is only just enough. The cherry here is milled to exactly 12 millimeters. The dimensions are super important to make this kumiko pattern. And these darker wenge boards, I've thicknessed those to exactly 19 millimeters. So a few hours later, and a lot of arm work, I've now ended up with a whole bunch of these triangular pieces. This is only 1/3 of them actually, because I've only cut one of the lengths of wood so far. I have 2 more lengths to cut, so back to the sawing. Before making any more of the black triangular pieces, I decided to go ahead and create some of the cherry pieces to fit in between them. And I actually just cut these on the bandsaw, but they turned out pretty nice. So I think in future I'm going to save myself a bunch of effort by just cutting these on the bandsaw. So a few hours later, I now have 124 of these black triangles as per the design. The asanoha pattern that I'm building is often used for kumiko, and if you were doing kumiko, you would start by assembling a grid like this, and it would be, if you put enough of these together, eventually you get a grid of hexagons, and then once you've built a grid like that, if you were doing kumiko, you would then make 3 pieces that fitted inside of here like this, and you'd fit these 3 pieces in like this. This is not assembled, so it doesn't fit together super well. But you would do that, and that would be your kumiko pattern. And of course, you wouldn't fill in these gaps. Although, of course, I have these triangular pieces to fill in the gaps like this. But I think what I will actually do, I think I'll do it the other way around. I think I'll start by making triangles like this first, and glue them together like that, and then use the disc sander to make sure these sides are very flat. And then once I've assembled those, I think then I will put these bits around the edge like this and gradually build up the whole cutting board. So that's my plan. Next thing is to make a whole bunch of these triangles. So to glue and clamp these triangles together whilst they're gluing, I'm going to need to make some kind of a jig. I've cut a few pieces of plywood. I'm going to kind of apply them like this, and then I'll clamp from here to this side, but just to make this a little bit more sturdy, I think I'll put another block of wood behind. And then when I apply the clamping, it's going to apply some sideways force to these 2 pieces. So I might just put a couple of extra blocks of wood in there and glue them all down to this piece of plywood here. It does mean I can only make one of these triangles at a time. I have about 40 of these triangles to make, and each one is going to have to sit in this jig for maybe at least an hour before the glue starts to dry. So I've got this clamping jig gluing right now. These walls here, I've made sure they're perfectly 90 degrees by using this 3-to-1 block, and on this digital angle meter you can see that that's set to exactly 60 degrees, and if I run it through here, it lines up perfectly with the two walls. So these walls are exactly 60 and they're exactly 90 degrees to the base. So that's one in the clamp waiting to dry, and just 39 more to go. My gluing jig was very successful. I was able to glue together all of these triangles, and I've arranged them on my workbench here just so I can check that I have actually cut enough pieces to be able to assemble the whole cutting board. After using the disc sander to smooth off the sides of all the triangles, I pushed them all together just to make sure that they all fit and create the right pattern. What I've decided to do next is to assemble small pieces of the cutting board, like this block here. This is actually the bottom right-hand corner. I think I can take these pieces like this, put them in my jig and glue them up and clamp them tight. And by the time I've made all these different pieces, then I can assemble all these pieces together. So after taking a few pieces and gluing them together, you end up with a block kind of like this. So after I've made 6 of these, and I'll stick 3 together and then 3 together to make 2 halves. The 2 halves will each fit through the planer, so I can plane it flat and then stick the 2 halves together at the very end. I finished cutting all the pieces for the bottom half of the cutting board, and I'm just starting on the top half. These pieces at the top here, these are not glued together yet. Some of these ones are glued, like a couple of them are glued into blocks like this, but a lot of them are also still loose. With this one I decided to start with the triangles and then surround the triangles with these grid pieces. It didn't work out so well because the triangles are not all perfectly the same size, like these triangular pieces here. They vary a little bit, and so I had to cut these to vary a little bit to fit the triangles, and that means that the whole thing doesn't really fit together as well as I would like. So it's okay, but it's going to require a little bit of filling in some of the small gaps, so not 100% happy with it. I've decided for the second half of the cutting board, I'm going to do a slightly different approach, and I'm going to make sure that I cut all of these grid pieces to be absolutely identical by constructing a jig for the bandsaw, and then stick these together into triangles first, and then fit these things are going to be adjusted to infill. I designed this jig so that with my bandsaw table set at about 30 degrees, I can place this here against the fence and against the table, and then I'll be able to slide this past the blade with a piece of wood here, by adjusting the position of the fence, I can adjust the length of the piece of wood, and that makes sure that every piece of wood that I cut on here will come out exactly the same. There'll be some trial and error required. I'll need to cut one piece, measure the angle, adjust the angle of the bandsaw table, and do it again until I get them to fit perfectly. I finished doing the grid work, and it looks okay, but I'm still going to put this project down as a fail, actually. The lines are not as straight as they should be. The grid pieces, come together, sort of together, but not really that much together. I think once it's been sanded, and if I put some, use some sawdust to fill the gaps, it's going to look not too bad. But if I was going to do this chopping board again, I would definitely do it. Definitely next time is I'd build the grid the same way that we do when we're building Kumiko, by making these long strips of wood with, cut at 30 degrees, 2/3 of the depth, etc. The way you do for a Kumiko grid. I would do it that way in the future, and then drop the triangles in afterwards. I think that will be much more successful. So these are the remaining triangle pieces that I need to fit into my grid work. And I'm going to make them fit into the grid using this 12-inch disc sander. To flatten this cutting board, I just cut up a few pieces of plywood and used a couple of clamps. I think this will be quite sufficient to get it flat. I don't need any really fancy flattening jig here. After using the flattening bit, it now looks quite a bit more like a cutting board. I can definitely see the pattern now emerging, and it's quite pretty. I think I need to do a little more cutting off at the edge. There's a bit here where it's not quite right, so I'm going to have to make it a tiny bit shorter, but it's actually pretty big anyway for a cutting board, so that's no problem. So this is the final result. Chopping board on the kitchen island in my kitchen. I'm pretty happy with it. I hope you enjoyed watching the video, and I'll catch you next time.